Hi there, and welcome to Our Weekly Craft, a source for ideas, inspiration, and fun for crafters. I'm Sarah White, Chief Maker at OurDailyCraft.com, and today I want to talk about decluttering craft supplies. Coming to you from a slightly different corner. I shifted over a little bit because I've been cleaning in this particular corner of my office. I have this nice clean flat surface, and you can see, if you've seen some of my older videos where I was showing a little bit more of the yarn cabinet, that it's a lot more full right now than it normally is because I've been putting things away. It needs to be reorganized because it's not by color or anything remotely organized, but I wanted to show it off anyway because it's a start, and I've been saying for months, all year, longer than forever, that I want to get my office in shape because I spend a lot of time here and I want it to be nice and I want to be able to find stuff when I need it and all of that, but it's kind of a continual struggle, and I have literally written a book about it, which is part of what I want to talk about, but it's still hard. Not wearing anything knit today, but I do have, which I'll probably be working on, these, which are the Malone leggings by Knittorious She. I did a test for these last year, and I'm so close to done. I've been knitting the legs 2 at a time-ish, in that I've been doing a couple of stripes on one, a couple of stripes on the other, so that I didn't have like the misery of knitting a whole leg and then I have to knit a whole nother leg. But I realized last week, I pulled this project out again to work on, which I last worked on it when we were on vacation, but I realized that I was like 6 inches from the end of the leg. Hopefully that's actually right, now that I've knit one and bounced off, because I didn't actually try it on again. But so I was like, okay, I'm going to power through and have one leg done, and then I've only got 6 inches left on the other leg, so I'm now on, I just bound off last night on the first leg, and I've got the 6 inches or so of the second leg to do, and so I'm going to work on that while we talk about decluttering. And decluttering projects is a thing too, right? It's not just the stuff, the supplies that we have that we're not using, but it's also the projects that we've been working on, things that maybe we've lost enthusiasm for, or we just decided we didn't really want to make and we abandoned them, or maybe we do want to make them and we just got, sidetracked on something else. And haven't finished them. So that's, also a thing when you're considering decluttering, is like, what are your projects that you need to finish? And that's a big thing I'm thinking about right now too, is as much as I want to try some new things or start some new things and use some of the yarn, I really need to focus on finishing some things first. And then that's, they weigh on your mind, those unfinished objects weigh on you just the same way that clutter does. It's like open stuff and it feels like stress, and our craft time, creativity, work should not feel like stress unless we're like deliberately challenging ourselves to try something new or something like that. But for the most part, it should be an enjoyable experience that is not full of stress and strain from like, oh, I've got a million unfinished things, or I've got all this stuff that I wanted to do, a project, and now I don't feel like doing it anymore, or whatever it is. So a couple of years ago now, I did actually write an ebook called How to Declutter Your Craft Supplies, and it just goes to show that it's like a continual effort is required to keep things in good shape. And I wasn't probably entirely in good shape at the time, even when I was writing the book, but it is, in a way, it approaches decluttering the way that any guide to decluttering does, considering your happiness, what you really need, what you really want to use. But it comes at it from a different angle, because with creative stuff, you can't use the rule of like, does it bring you joy? Well, the thing I make from it might bring me joy, but this, stack of paper in itself doesn't bring me joy, but thinking about the cards or the collages or the art that I can make with that stuff, well, that gives me joy. But that's not the same thing, and that doesn't mean you need to keep the entire stack of paper just because the potential of it is joyful, right? Because the actual having of the thing, if you've had the same stack of paper for 5 years and you haven't actually made any cards, is not joyful. You can't use have I touched it in the last 6 months as a rule necessarily, because you have a yarn stash, or you have a fabric stash, or you have paint that you're not necessarily going to use every color of paint in 6 months or a year. But that doesn't mean that you want to toss it out just because you haven't used it right now. But there has to be some kind of rule, right? You can't just keep everything because it might be useful someday, because that's how you got into this situation of having way more stuff than you have room for, assuming most of us are in that place where we have more stuff than we have room for. We have more stuff than we could reasonably create with in possibly the amount of time we have on the planet, but in the time before we accumulate more stuff that we're using or not using, as the case may be. So there needs to be a different approach when it comes to craft supplies, and like thinking about what kind of crafts you're actually making, what kind of things you might want to do in the near-term future, not like the someday future, but like realistically, what could you use in the next year or whatever, and what kind of space you have, and how full, feels okay for you. Like, when do supplies become clutter? And some of that is personal, like what feels like too much for you, what is too much for your space, how much can you reasonably use, how do you feel about having all that stuff, because even if you can store it, if it makes you feel miserable because you've got all this stuff you're not using, well, then that's not helpful. It doesn't make you feel good about creating if you're just going to be overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that you have that you're not using. And I know that it's hard because you can think about, it's an economics term, but sunk costs, which means that you paid for something, and yarn, fabric, paint, canvases, woodworking supplies, all of that can be really expensive. And so you bought it with the hope that you would make something beautiful out of it and feel like it was worth your money and worth your time, and worth the space that it takes up in your house and the energy that it takes in your life to have this stuff. But sunk costs are they're sunk. That's you've spent the money already, and you cannot quantify the value of the thing anymore based on what you paid for it, because you have it now, right? And the money's gone. You can't get it back. You can't return 20 years of yarn purchases because they were expensive. But if you're not going to make something from that, it's not worth it to, it's not worthwhile to keep that stuff or to feel guilty about the fact that you spent money on it and then didn't use it. And not to get too deep into it, but I also like to think, if you're having trouble with getting rid of things, to think about the supplies themselves. It's like not really having a personality, but having a purpose, right? So if you're not going to make something out of that stack of paper, then that paper is not fulfilling its purpose, right? It's just on your shelf. If you can find someone who can take it and actually use it, then isn't that better for the stuff itself? But it's also better for you, because you can feel good about, I gave this to somebody and they're getting to use it creatively in a way that I wasn't ever going to. And that, you're like giving it new life. You're letting it live its destiny, which sounds super cheesy. And I get that even as I'm saying it out loud. But sometimes that helps to make it feel like, I'm sending it on to somebody who actually will use it. I mean, we hope, right, that when we give people stuff that they actually use it or pass it on again to somebody else, that hopefully it's got a better chance of getting used by going to somebody else. And then I know too that there like can be difficulty in finding where to send your craft supplies, because you don't necessarily want to just, give them to the thrift store where people aren't necessarily going to know what they have, or um, it might not be appreciated or seen by somebody who really wants it. um, so since I have a kid who's in school, my first place that I've always gone if I have excess is to my daughter's school. And so they have a tinkering lab, and they have been the beneficiaries of a great quantity of my yarn, mostly like acrylics and cottons and things that they do teach, or like have had summer camps in the past where they taught knitting. Kids, they do a little bit of like a fiber arts unit in tinkering, so sometimes the kids are at least finger knitting if they're not actually learning how to knit or crochet with hooks or needles. They had knitting looms and things that kids could use, but also yarn can just be used. They can make tassels and pom-poms and things that are used in other projects, and so it's gone to use there. One time I had a giant bag of yarn, and I just posted on Facebook, hey, I've got this giant bag of yarn, can anybody use it? And a friend who owned a daycare took it, and they used it for yarn crafts at her daycare. So that's often a place where you can just be like, I've got all this stuff, and one of your friends or somebody they know either already does that craft or is wanting to get into that craft, and they'll take things off your hands to be able to get started for free or cheap. Often you can find, charitable organizations. If you go to church, your church might do like prayer shawls or make quilts for people who are going through things, so you can check there. Again, if you have access to a school, a daycare center, a senior center, a local activity center for kids, all of those sorts of places. And I know it's hard to want to hunt down these places, so that's why I said posting on Facebook. You might have a connection to somebody who already is involved in one of those groups, and you can be like, yeah, I'll take your fabric, we make quilts for babies or whatever, and then you can feel good about it going to somewhere who's going to actually use it. One that I have that's a current inspiration for going through my fabric stash is there's a local group that we have a large population of people from the Marshall Islands in Northwest Arkansas, and one of the things that is big in their culture is that they have the women make dresses and they make shirts for the men, and yes, it is typically women who do the sewing, but they will have matching dresses for special events, weddings, birthdays. They do year-old birthdays and young children birthdays as a big celebration, and they'll have matching outfits for those sorts of celebrations. And it's a way for the women to earn money, of course. And several of their seamstresses died of COVID, and so they've started a training program for women to learn how to sew so that they can continue the tradition of making those garments, and also, so that they can earn a little income from home. And that's great, both the cultural tradition of sewing and getting new people into it. But they're always in need of fabric to practice with, and I think they can use little pieces of fabric as highlights on dresses and things. And so that's inspired me, has given me a little extra motivation to go through my fabric, because there are things probably that I won't use but that they can use, and it can help other people who are learning how to sew, and that's a great thing. Your local community may also have a Buy Nothing group. That's sometimes they're on Facebook. There's also an app that can connect you to local people. They are, if you remember Free Cycle, which maybe some places still have Free Cycle too, but it's sort of like that, but it's specific to a geographic location. So my town's not that big, but it has two, one for the east side of town and one for the west side of town, because the idea is that it helps to build community among your neighbors, that you offer things that are still good, that you don't want anymore or need anymore. You can go in there and make requests for things. People, will borrow tools, or if you're having a yard sale and you need folding tables or clothes racks or things, people will ask for those things to borrow, as well as just giving things. And so there's often people on there, and I'm going to get rid of some specific things by posting on the Buy Nothing group. I've gotten some fabric from there, even though I didn't need more fabric, but it's fine. But I have, like, one of the things that I'm finally deciding that I'm willing to let go of is candle making supplies. I think probably all of us who are crafty and creative have had in our lives the idea that there are crafts that we would like to do and that we don't necessarily do, or we don't enjoy doing, or we don't do enough to justify having all the supplies. Mine are scrapbooking and candle making. So I have a couple, maybe 3 times in my life, decided that I was going to be a scrapbooker, and bought books and paper and supplies and things, and then never actually done anything with them. So I probably have some scrapbooking supplies. I think the last big purge I did, I got rid of. I still have a lot of paper, but I do collage and card making and things, so I need to pare down the paper, but it's probably not as much as it was. And I have intermittently gone through phases of making candles, but we stopped burning candles when my daughter was a baby, and she's about to be 13, so it's not like we couldn't continue, couldn't start burning candles again. But we've got a lot of candles that we just don't use them that much. And I feel like I have a lot of supplies that could be better used by someone else who's more interested in doing it. And my candles I won't say they never came out right, but they often didn't come out as nicely as I had hoped. And so it's just not my skill. I like doing soap, like melt and pour soap, easy soap making stuff. Not with lye and all of that, but so I'll keep stuff that I can use for soap making, but the specific to candle making stuff, I think I'm ready to part with this time around. But anyway, I hope that it's hot out, right? Okay, in the northern hemisphere, a lot of places are really hot right now. If you're in the southern hemisphere, maybe it's cold right now, and it's just not a good time to be outside. So it's a good summer project to go through your craft supplies and evaluate what you really need, what you really want to keep, what you're excited. That's another key, is what do you see and it excites you, and you're like, oh, I really want to make something with that. That's a keeper. Maybe that's a spark joy, is not just I could make something with that, but oh, I really want to make something with that. Is the difference between the potential joy of any raw material and the specific joy of oh, I know what I want to make with that, or ooh, I just really love that and I want to use it. I have this amazing I can't think what the word is for it now, but it's hand block printed fabric that I got in payment for doing a blog post for somebody, for a fabric store. I've had it for years because I'm afraid to cut it, right? So that's a thing we need to get over to, and that's probably a whole other episode. But those things, I'm excited to try it, but I'm scared too. So it's been in my stash for years. So maybe now is the time to get over that fear of using the good stuff, and that's part of it too, going through your stash and evaluating things and pulling out that stuff that you're oh yeah, I need to make something out of that. And also the stuff that's oh, I'm a little intimidated by that, but I really want to try it. So I encourage you, if you're feeling like the weight of all your stuff is too much, or you've exploded out of the space that you have to comfortably store stuff, if you can't find things when you're looking for them, if you've accidentally bought more of something and then found, oh, I already had 5 spools of white thread, why'd I buy more? Whatever. If you're feeling like it would be a good time to go through some of your stuff, and you don't have to do it all at once. Like, that's in the ebook too, is like, it's really about with crafts too, often when you're decluttering, they're like, do a whole room at a time, or a whole, do all your clothes at once and do all your books at once, whatever. But I really feel like it's more beneficial to look at things by craft. And so, like, if you're a paper crafter, or if you have paper crafting stuff, like, gather all the paper crafting stuff and deal with that, and then gather all the yarn and deal with that. It's like separate things, because it's separate stuff, and it's separate, it has separate uses. And so, and then you can see all of it and be like, oh my gosh, I've got a lot of paper, how much, and then you can maybe like see where it was, find where you want to store it, and be like, okay, this is the space that I want. Like, I have this box or this shelf or whatever, and I want all my paper stuff to fit on this shelf. So how much do I have to get rid of? What are things that are just like ugly, or, if we're talking paper, they're like wrinkled or torn, or things that that I know I'm not gonna use, and then, like, if you have multiples of things and all of that, and I go through the whole, like, things to consider. I'm going to put a link in the show notes for the book if it's something that you need a little extra help with. Please leave comments if you have specific questions that aren't in the book, or just about how to get started. But I really do encourage you. I mean, like, it's hard to get started, but once you do, like, I have this little corner, and I'm looking out into a room full of mess, and it makes me itchy. But I'm like excited because I have this one little corner, right? And I have this flat surface that's cleaned off, and now I have like a little staging area where I can work on other things, and I have momentum, and that's really important. And so, it's a thing I'm going to be working on this summer. I hope that you'll work on it too. And that this is giving you a little boost to think about, some things to think about as you approach decluttering craft supplies and all of that. And I would love to hear if you try it in the comments. And that was probably long enough, but quick reading. I'm still reading Outlander. It's about to auto return to the library because I can't read 900 pages in 2 weeks, and somebody's got to hold on it. So I'll be back to Project Hail Mary for a while. I also have just started and not really delved into yet, but I think it's called You're the Only One I've Told, which is a collection of essays about abortion. And watching Stranger Things still, feeling the onslaught of like a lot of good TV, because we still need to watch the last episode of Strange New Worlds. We have only watched one episode of the For All Mankind. We're about to get What We Do in the Shadows back. We're going to have Reservation Dogs in a couple weeks. There's like so much good stuff right now. I am also watching, I just finished The Way Down, about Gwen Shamblin and the Remnant Fellowship Church in Nashville, which was a weight loss cult, is still, I guess, a weight loss cult. That was really interesting. And then I started a documentary that's also on HBO called Endangered, which is about journalists in different places in the world where freedom of the press is threatened, and yes, America is one of them. There's a person from Brazil, Mexico, not Spain, excuse me, and a couple in the United States, and it was filmed during 2020 mostly, so there's, covering COVID, there's covering Black Lives Matter protests, there's Mexican women protesting the epidemic of women who are kidnapped, raped, murdered, and the lack of any willingness to investigate those crimes. I've watched a little over half of it. It's like a movie length documentary, but it's hard to watch, as a former journalist myself. I feel like watching things like that it's hard, but it's important for people to know, both what the collapse of local news really means in the world and, the trouble of people insisting that their point of view is news and that it's the truth and that it's the only thing that matters, and that newspapers lie because they're reporting truth that is not the truth that you believe in. And it's a lot. And when press freedom goes, when newspapers go, it's just really bad for a community and for the world, because we don't really know what's going on, and people who say that their truth is the truth is what really happened. Who's to say that they're not telling the truth? So anyway, that's all for this week. Thanks for listening to me. Talking, like I'm really passionate about, even though it's hard for me too, I'm really passionate about that issue of decluttering craft supplies. It's really important. I think because it makes you feel like you are weighed down by those things, and getting rid of things that you're not going to use, and especially when you can pass them on to someone who's enthusiastic about trying that craft, or who already does it and is excited about getting your stuff. It's a weight lifted, and it does make you even feel more creative and more like you want to do stuff with the stuff that you have left. And that's in the book too. There's some projects, so it's like clean out your stuff and then make something, because that's the whole point of it, is that you get the joy of making back. So I hope that you will do some of that and let me know how it goes. Tell me what you're reading, watching, making, etc. in the comments, and I hope that you have a great crafty week, and I will see you again soon.